Welcome back to the Occult Rejects. Today we are joined by Angel Millar, an author, esoteric researcher, lecturer, hypnotist, martial artist, and longtime practitioner of the initiatic path. Angel has written extensively on Freemasonry, masculinity, symbolism, mysticism, self-transformation, and the deeper architecture of initiation. His work has always moved in that difficult territory between tradition and transformation, between the old initiatic systems and the modern human being trying to recover meaning, discipline, spiritual force, and contact with something beyond the flat material world. Today, we are getting into his new book, Supernatural Woman and the Male Initiate, Bonded Through Dreams. This is a book about one of the most strange, powerful, and misunderstood figures in religious and esoteric history. The supernatural woman, the muse, the Valkyrie, the sorceress, the dream visitor, the erotic initiatrix, the divine feminine presence who appears not as decoration, not as passive symbol, but as a force that tests, transforms, inspires, wounds, awakens, and initiates. Angel traces this figure through ancient Greek and Zoroastrian traditions, the Eddas, Icelandic sagas, Torso Wicca, Freemasonry, Jung, Freud, art, sexual symbolism, mystical ecstasy, and the visionary lives of figures like St. Teresa, Marjorie Kemp, Aleister Crowley, and Lady Frida Harris. This is exactly the kind of conversation we like to have here, where myth, psychology, ritual, sex, dreams, initiation, and the occult all collide. Is the supernatural woman an archetype? Is she a spirit? Is she the anima? Is she a test? Is she a doorway? Is she dangerous? Is she necessary? And what does it mean when the male initiate is not transformed by domination, conquest, or force, but by encounter with the feminine intelligence that comes through dreams, desire, poetry, terror, ecstasy, and revelation? And now, before we get to the guest himself, let me introduce the other rejects. Judith, the Loon, what is going on? Oh, maybe she's not ready. We'll start with Jen. Jen, what is going on, sir? How are you?
What is up, Cardinal, Mr. 93? I'm pretty good. I'm excited for this. So Angel doesn't probably know who I am, but I'm a Tantric Buddhist, so Vajrayanist. So the Scarlet Woman or Dakini or Vajrayogini, this is a very frequent figure that I've discussed on this show for the last 3 years. This is why I started podcasting, because I had a series of Dakini experiences, which I likened to the Tree of Life. I compared it to the Mahavijaya, the grouping of 10 Newari goddesses from Nepal. So it's a discussion every time we have about Kabbalah or about Tantra, who she is and like what is her nature and what is her name. So I don't know how much I'll be able to add to this because I'm not as familiar with the Western esoteric perspective, but I will be here to listen and learn. So if people want to check me out, they can check me out on Substack at thresholdsaints.substack.com, on X and IG at Threshold Saints, as well as our YouTube channel, which is undergoing renovation, but it is active. And we just did a live on Friday. So youtube.com/@thetrue, TRVE, graylodge.com. So we talk about meta magic, speculative Kabbalah, speculative Kala Chakra, and speculative Gnosticism. So that's what you get every Friday. It's kind of like a Gonzo Gnostic radio kind of thing. So yeah, you can check us all out there. And of course, let me shout out Eros Up, who just interviewed another lodge member on her channel, Joshua the Branch, who's been on the show many times. And she's also interviewed me, as well as Solar Exile, who's also part of the Grey Lodge and also been on the show. So thank you guys so much. Appreciate it. Judith and Brandon, and of course, Nick and Angel, great to meet you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Jen, for joining us. I really appreciate it. I'm very glad you're here. And my boy Brandon, Magus in the Media. What is going on, Gabe? So how are you?
I'm great. What a great morning to start us off with. Thank you for always having me, Nick. Love being here at all times. Jin, my boy and my man, I'm so happy that we can be on a stream together. Love it as always. Everyone should go check out Jin and I's 5-part episode on Battle Cry. We crush all things occult, Western, esoteric, Eastern mysticism. We really just bring the fire to the space, and I think it's really important. Everyone out there, if they don't know, head over to Magus in the Media on YouTube, subscribe, like, and share. Hit all the things, Instagram, X, TikTok. We dislike TikTok, but we're there anyway. One of those things that I'm really excited for is that I've read Angel's books. Two of them that really helped move me were the Path of the Warrior Mystic and the 3 Stages of Initiatic Spirituality. Fantastic books. I myself can really relate due to being a practitioner of the Western esoteric tradition, as well as almost 20 years now deeply ingrained into my martial arts practice. And so when we're hitting on all those things, trying to be the best warrior mystics we can, Angel. So I'm just really excited for this conversation. We're just dropping knowledge all the time. I've got all kinds of interviews coming out. So everyone just go check out Magus and the Media. We're here to bring back myth, magic, and meaning. Thank you, Nick, for the day.
No, of course. Thank you. And like you were saying, I mean, I'll be honest, Angel, I haven't read any of your books before, but I remember seeing your name when I first got into this stuff. Mm-hmm. So when I was sent an email saying that, would you be interested in so-and-so? I was like, oh, holy shit. I was like, I remember this name from when I got into this. So this is really cool for me also. I really appreciate it. And Judith, the Loon, she is back. What is going on? How are you? Can you let everybody know what's up with you and all your amazing stuff?
Thank you for having me. I apologize for having to dash out there for a quick moment. Angel, I look forward to your discussion today. Like Nick and Magus says, I am familiar with your name. You're like an icon in a way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Brandon, Jen, it's always a pleasure to see you. And everyone, you can find me at YouTube, Spreaker, and on X, as the Loon.
No, thank you very much. And I'm glad you made it, Judith. Should be another fun one. And finally, Angel, sir, if you want to let people know anything I might have left out or want to promote anything, please let everybody know where they can find all your amazing books and anything else you got going on.
Well, all of the books are on Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble and all that kind of thing. Actually, the Supernatural Woman book is available for pre-order at the moment. It'll be out in 3 weeks. But I've written 7 books. The first 3 were histories of Freemasonry, also one on the history of Freemasonry and the occult. And then the last 4 within the traditions have been much more my own kind of reflections on the occult world and initiation, but really diving into a lot of, I think, lesser known areas.
Awesome. I'm noticing that painting you have behind you. Did you make that yourself, or?
I did. I painted that probably around 2004, somewhere around there. I'd have to think a little bit more, but somewhere around 2004, I think. 2005, nice. Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, just caught my attention now.
It's based on a Masonic tracing board, which are paintings that are shown that were shown traditionally during Masonic ritual to show all of the different symbols of each degree.
Yeah, I was going to ask real quick, and I wasn't trying to do it to put any pressure on you. But are you because of the Freemasonry stuff? And then I was like, I'm going to ask him if he's a member of Freemasons. And then I saw that behind you, and I'm like, well, probably is. But are you a member of the Freemasons and stuff?
Yeah, I am. I joined in October 2001 in New York City, and so I've been a member for over 25 years now. But I don't attend lodge that often, just because my routine it tends to be waking up really, really early in the morning. But I'm still involved in other ways. Occasionally, I give talks in Masonic lodges, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Fraternal Review, which is a Masonic magazine. But we do a lot of interesting things. I just created an issue on Freemasonry in Haiti, and I interviewed a voodoo priest for that. Looking at the influence of Freemasonry on voodoo, which I knew nothing about. So, we go where other Masonic magazines dare to tread. So,
that was pretty cool. Yeah, when you had all those books on Freemasonry, I was like, well, I would assume he might be a Freemason if he's got that much to say about it. I was just taking a guess. So
they're all histories, but they're all histories. So I don't really give any opinion or anything. But I do think for the time it went into a lot of areas that weren't explored and maybe even aren't well known now. So,
and I know, you obviously know who Crowley is. have you ever went to any OTO lodges when you were in New York?
I haven't. Sorry.
Okay, no, I was just wondering. I used to be a member of Tahuti Lodge, so
one of my closest friends here used to be a member of Tahuti Lodge, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Nice.
I feel bad for him.
Yeah.
Not joking.
Yeah, I don't know if you have to be sorry. It almost sounds like there's some issues issues in the OTO world right now. So
That's what I see. Yeah, that's what I hear from YouTube.
from the YouTube, exactly.
I've been hearing that since I was a member. So it's like, has anything changed? You know? All right. I guess real quick before we start getting into it, and I ask everybody this, this question basically, what was it that got you to, that brought you to the occult?
Yeah, I've actually mentioned it before a few times, but basically when I was 15, I picked up a book on astral projection and the elements, just from a local bookstore, actually. And obviously I didn't understand a word of it, but, I did try it. And then about a year later, I did get a hold of a book when I was 16 on pagan rituals. And which is, I didn't realize until recently, it was by Herman Slater of the Magical Child bookshop in New York. I didn't know that at the time. But and then when I was 17, friends took me to what they called a hippie shop. And it turned out really to be a sort of neo-pagan occult shop. They did sell a lot of hippie stuff, like tie-dye clothing and boxes with, brass moons on them and stuff like that. But that's when I really started to get involved in it in a serious way. And then when I was 17 at that point, and I found the atmosphere, I have to say, was quite toxic and unhealthy, but although beautiful in another sense, that they sort of it was impressed upon me that the world is more than shopping malls and 9 to 5 and this kind of stuff, and that there's something intrinsically magical about the natural world, which I think was very healthy for that age. But then when I was 19, I was initiated into the Illuminates of Thanatos by Peter Carroll, who just passed away. So,
oh wow, look at that!
Yeah, so it's been colorful.
Lineage there. That's impressive.
Yeah. And I'm writing about that at the moment, actually, but we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, nice. How do you think that your experience with that group and Peter Carroll himself changed your whole magical outlook?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think the answer to that doesn't come for decades, actually. But now I can probably answer it. But just to say, at the time, the neo-pagan group was very controlling and dogmatic, and actually not very pagan. It was more of a they wouldn't have acknowledged that, but in a way it was much more of a sort of Freudian interpretation of paganism and not very authentic. But the IoT, when I joined in London in Temple Misanthropy, which was the only London temple at the time. Later another one was established apparently, but yeah, it was incredibly intense. It was during the quote unquote ice magic war. It was during the Gulf War, which I think we were much more, let's say, magically linked to than the ice war in some respects. And there are some things that haven't been said that I'm going to say eventually. But yeah, so it was an incredibly tense time, and just in the country in general, it was an incredibly paranoid time. We were in the war in the Middle East. There was the satanic panic going on, so it felt like we were sort of under siege, and I think that was very much reflected in the attitudes and the magic of Temple Misanthropy, which was really, I think, very dark, to be honest. But and I left a year later, and perhaps I should say, with a bit of a trigger warning, that I left because I woke up one day. Well, to backtrack slightly, it was in the summer, and I woke up in the middle of the night one night. I could hardly breathe, and I felt like something was blocking my lungs. And then I was okay. Like a minute later, obviously, or I'd be dead. But and then not the next morning, but the morning after that, I woke up and all this blood came out of my mouth, and I spat all this blood into the sink. And at that point, I was like, I'm quitting the IoT. I'm quitting everything, and I changed my life entirely. And basically, a year later, I was like a different person. I had really long hair, and I shaved it off, and went to art college, and changed my life in really radical ways. But I think so in how it kind of shaped me magically, I think something interesting happened probably about 2 years ago now. I'd have to look at the date, but after actually it must be less than that, maybe a year ago, after I had finished the Supernatural Woman book, I started writing a book on chaos magic, which is now it's sort of it's this narrative of different things I've gone through, but with that in it. And I picked up Dave Lee's Primordial Chaos on chaos magic. He's been in the IoT for about 40 years, I think, and in there it mentioned that there was a book by Ingrid Fisher on Hamming-Yar, and I thought that sounds like the book I've just written, and I knew her from the temple like 35 years ago, and I thought I have to read this book, and it said that it would be available, I think, in like 2024 or 23 or whenever it was, and I looked for it and I couldn't find it anywhere, even though it should have been out, and then literally 3 weeks later, the publisher contacted me and said, "Can you read this book and give a blurb for it?" And it was that book that I was looking for. So, and there are definite links to the book that I've written as well, though it's a very different perspective. Hers is a much more Jungian perspective on it. But it's kind of crazy that 35 years later, this book should show up exactly as I'm looking. Well, actually, I'd given up looking for it at that point, but had been looking for it. So, and I think, reading her book, I think if I was to ask her, why would that happen, considering we hadn't been in contact for decades, I think she would say that, it was such a weird and intense time that there was some sort of Hamming-Yar in the group, which is a kind of luck that can be transmitted to different people. But it certainly seemed like or felt like a magical thing for sure. But I've sort of reassessed my views of the IoT over the years, which was, as I say, dark and intense, and in some ways very, very negative, but also in another respect, it was a very kind of a positive thing. And ultimately, I think I was just too young to appreciate it all at the time. I was 19, so But on the other hand, maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah,
I have a quick follow. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Brandon. I have a quick follow-up for Angel. Do you consider, maybe in perspective, like historical perspective now, as you were saying, that your early initiations into chaos magic allowed you to undergo radical personal transformation, as you described, cutting your hair, going to art college, because those, it teaches us to be very flexible as a system, right?
Right.
So I just wonder, like, on your perspective, do you think that perhaps maybe, as what Brandon was saying, as a transformational magical experience, but maybe that is what it is. It's the flexibility of the system, the ability to change not only the parameters of your will or whatever, but also yourself.
Yeah, well, I have to say that my recollection is that it was in a sense, temple misanthropy was a lot less chaos magic-y than you might imagine, in that, most of the time we weren't doing these sort of postmodern rituals. Ian Reed, who was the temple master, was basically devoted to Northern European mysteries, and I remember someone else did a grimoire invocation. Let's leave it at that. So it wasn't this sort of wacky postmodernism where we're all playing with paradigms all the time, though that's what you tend to think of chaos magic. But as a catalyst, it definitely was what facilitated this radical transformation. But that's also because I was staring my mortality in the face very dramatically, and things that really had to change, I think.
I do think it's interesting you brought up the idea of chaos magic with post-modernity or post-modern ways of magic, simply because the way I approach it, I very much tie it to the tantric conception of things. Like, all tantric cosmology changes with the text. So you have to have like a degree of flexibility, but you're still within the same ontological, if you practice Buddhist Dharma, then you're still within the same ontological view of things. So your greater perspective remains the same, but maybe your like day-to-day or textual hermeneutic changes. So that I just want to clarify that I agree that there is a problem probably with doing postmodern larpage where you're invoking every abyssal god possible. That's probably not that useful, but I do think that there's a kind of flexibility where you can change cosmologies. That is, if you're within the same, I would call it being within the same mandala. So you're maybe invoking parallel entities. Are they real or not real? Well, that's a question. But no, I appreciate that. Thank you, Angel.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, my last thing just about that before we move on is, do you think, like, were you already going through initiations and learning from them and doing the thing? And do you feel like some kind of egregore attached? And then that was like a thing that you had to, that your body was reacting to, and then you just had to complete, like, the whole like body physiological, psychological change had to happen to help detach from that kind of egregore?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be one interpretation, and I think you could say yes to that. I think as part of the egregore, quote unquote, I would say that I think we all lived a very transient life for that year that I was a member. Most of us did anyway. I mean, I moved from one apartment to the next. I lived in 3 apartments during that time in London, and my closest friend Nick, he moved out from his girlfriend, who was beautiful, and then was living above a kebab shop, or sleeping on the floor, and then Nick, Ian, Reed, and Ingrid moved to Germany for 3 months, lost the apartment they were living in, and then returned. So it was this weird thing of really transient, at the same time, very intense, sort of emotionally and psychologically, and me personally doing magic and art all the time. So it was, and I work. To be honest with you, I work all the time, but even now, but that was really too intense. So it was a demanding egregore. Yeah.
You mentioned before a little bit something, just something I wanted to ask your opinion when you mentioned it earlier about satanic panic. Do you see that coming back around again, in a sense?
There is a little bit of that, yeah, definitely. And I would say, there's always a danger of blindly supporting what appears to be our own side. And I think that a lot of occult imagery gets misused by people that just want to upset Christians, because then they'll get in the media, and then that will get them press, and they'll sell more records. And I find it all very cynical, really. But the people that's going to affect are not going to be these pop stars raking in the cash. It's going to be some kid who's into Wicca or something like that in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, I mean, it definitely is stirring. I've definitely seen that. But yeah, there's a lot of sort of misuse of this symbolism as well, I think.
I never thought of that angle, but I mean, that does happen. You're like, really,
yeah, it does. Yeah.
a really good point that people will just throw the stuff around, or they'll even, like you said, do it to troll people or to,
Yeah, and even this sort of satanic imagery. I mean, I'm not very up on pop music, but I've seen some pop singers using sort of dressing as the devil, and it's to me, obviously Christians are going to react to that, but to me, I also look at it and think, it's a bit pathetic to be doing that in an age when really there's no sort of downside for you. You're not going to lose your livelihood or anything. There's no risk at all. I mean, if you were doing it in the 1970s, yeah, okay, cool, maybe you're taking a risk. But now I think it's just people do it because there is no risk to them, but they feel that they're looking edgy, and they're not. They just look silly, in my view.
And it's almost like this whole culture war thing that their publicists are telling them to dress this way and to act this way. And then you get the dialectic where all of a sudden you get the evangelical, conservative, religious who are then completely battling against that. And the only harm is the people in the middle, it seems.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, that's how it tends to happen. It's like, like you'll get some Christians or conspiracy theorists. It's like they point at at the dead people, that really can't even stand up or even say anything back. And that trickles down kind of to us who follow some of those teachings. I'm kind of getting at Crowley will get a bad rap, and then since I'm a Thelemite, then obviously now my connection makes me a fucking crazy person.
Yeah, I mean, I know all about these conspiracy theories for sure. But yeah, one should always take into consideration people on our side that are saying stupid things as well, and giving them ammunition, because I see that a lot, especially in certain people in Freemasonry making all these wild claims. You think, oh my goodness, they're completely historically false, and yet they're sort of feeding these conspiracy theories with their crazy talk. And we let them off because we think that they're our guys, but they're not.
Yeah, it's so true. I feel like it's almost like I feel like we have to bring back the sword of reason in a flaming manner to be able to cut away all the nonsense. I've been feeling that extra, especially because Jen and I were doing some live streams where we're really trying to see how convoluted the occult Western esoteric podcasting YouTube kind of scene is, and it seems like there's just so much craziness out there, no matter the institutionalized lodges to the solo practitioners, and that's for me, and I'm only speaking for me, that's one of my issues with the postmodern occult scene, is that it's like the allegiance is to the trying to sell something instead of trying to be the best individual that you can become. And in doing so, you radiate a kind of magnetism that then others want to try to make themselves become the best individual that they can become.
Yeah,
that's
yeah, I've seen it getting a little crazy lately too. I've seen some conspiracy podcasters literally calling for the killing of non-Christians, and I'm like, holy fuck,
Jesus.
Yeah, that's pretty intense.
What the fuck is wrong with you? Yeah, and the funny thing, it comes out of the skinniest, smallest fucking dude's mouth.
Yeah.
I wanted to reply, be like, yo, when you want to do that, please come see me first. Come see me first. Because your crusade will end real fucking quick. Come on, dude. Get the fuck over yourself. All right, let's get back into the book. Let's get serious here. Angel. For the listeners who are just encountering this book, or even you, what do you mean by supernatural woman, and why is she so important to the male initiate?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so the book explores the history of the appearance of a supernatural woman to male initiates, let's say, really from ancient Greece through Norse mythology to Middle English literature. So there is a common theme, and it seems to me that this figure of this female is tied not only to the genius, but often specifically to poetry or literature. And you do see the supernatural man appearing to women often, though not as often. And the best example of that, well, apart from fairies, but the best example of that would be in the worldview of the Norse-speaking peoples, or the Norse, and that is that they had the conception of this supernatural woman called the Fylgja, which basically followed one Fylgja would follow one man throughout his life. Not every man had a Fylgja, but they were this supernatural being, and they would appear right before death, or a little while before death, but they could also appear in dreams, and sometimes they would appear if they got really fed up with the man, and they might appear and then leave him, so they could actually detach themselves. It wasn't like Crowley's holy guardian angel, which is somehow always tied to you. This female being could actually desert one man if she didn't like him anymore and go with another man. So, and it depended on the character of the individual. So if a man had a strong character, he had a strong Fylgja, and there was some relationship between the character and this supernatural being, as if they're kind of feeding each other. But then if the man, proved himself to be a lowly character, then she would depart. But in the same culture, there's no equivalent for women. Women don't have a supernatural man in the same sense. There is a term, a dromkona, meaning dream woman, which is sometimes synonymous with this Fylgja. And there is another term, drommatha, meaning dream man. So a woman could have some sort of dreams of some kind of male being, but it wasn't quite the same. It wasn't like a dream man would turn up at the end of their lives or anything like that. It was seemed to be intimately tied to the character, at least not as far as we know anyway.
I know, like, for myself, and it made me like kind of wonder about your book or this idea. Once I started having certain experiences, I don't, I do believe that I guess, left my body to an extent and was just not here anymore. For some reason, having that experience, and I think like where I was, it's hard to explain, but I've always kind of looked at it as some sort of feminine thing. Or I think also because maybe the whole experience, like when I had the experience, it was love. So maybe I just have to associate it with women or something. I don't know. But even to the point where I just trying to make sense of what I'm trying to get at. If people happen to even know Megadeth, their song Mary Jane, to me, feels like the same thing, where it's like this sort of mystical woman thing that you were just obsessed with now because of an experience. And for me, I guess like there's like some sort of divine feminine that I resonate with because of that. It's almost like not to sound crazy or silly, but it's like almost a longing for that experience again, or that love.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's like anywhere kind of what you go with this book.
Yeah, and I do talk a lot about altered states of consciousness or hypnosis or trance in relation to this figure, because she often turns up in dreams, and this seems to be an important not way of contacting her, because at least in the Norse world, there's no sort of ritual to the figure or anything like that. There may be in other cultures, like in ancient Greece, for example. There might be prayers to the nymph, which a man would marry, but it is intimately somehow tied to dreams, and with altered states of consciousness and the genius, I would say, inspiration. So I definitely touch on that. Exactly. Yeah.
Inspiration. Yeah. It's almost like it's like an ethereal muse.
Yeah, that's right. Definitely. Yeah.
I like that. That's awesome, man. What was the original spark? Like, what made you think, you know what, we need a book on this?
Yeah, so I didn't actually think that. So I was writing. I wrote a lengthy prose poem, which I'll probably be editing for the rest of my life, no doubt. But I thought, well, no one's going to read a prose poem by itself, and I need some essays to go with it. So I wrote some essays, and I kept writing, and I kept editing, and then at one point, just this theme started to emerge, and I thought, maybe it should be a book. So it became a book. I just extracted a couple of chapters and then began writing it as a book. So that's actually how it happened. There wasn't a defining moment per se, but it was just sort of an awakening to this subject that I don't think most people consider, even in the occult world. It's pretty unknown. Yeah,
that's cool. Like how that worked out, and here you are now.
Yeah, that's right.
Did anybody have anything they wanted to say or ask?
Actually, I did.
Yeah, nice. No, go, Lynn.
I actually wanted to ask you, when it comes to the male initiate, they don't usually share this experience out loud with many people. When they do, it's usually poo-pooed off as a fantasy they're having, or something, just a psychological thing. Do you think it's a danger to that particular initiate to encounter those dismissive explanations?
Well, I think we're very aware of how we stereotype women and all of the ways in which women might be disenfranchised, but we don't really think the same about men, because we tend to think that men are oppressors. And before I answer your question directly, As I've spoken across America at different Masonic lodges, and one of the reasons I wrote my book, Path of the Warrior Mystic: Being a Man in an Age of Chaos, was because I just met so many men who would, come up to me after and say, well, my father was an alcoholic, or he was an abuser, or I didn't know him. And it was clear to me that most men are just completely lost in this day and age and have no real guidance. And, one of the reasons for joining a Masonic lodge is actually to actually, have a little bit of guidance from men who have character, rather than just be sort of floating through life, going from one thing to the next and never being anchored anywhere. And, we're suspicious of, Masonic lodge with men getting together and, that's terrible and all this kind of thing. But, it's like, try being a man, How would you like it? You grow up, you barely see your father. Your mother's always there, but you barely see your father. You don't have any good role models. You're told that you're just this horrible person who's oppressed everyone from the age of 0. Of course men are going to want to be around other men of character, and it's a healing thing. Why are you complaining? But yeah, so one thing that we do is we talk about men's sexual fantasies, or that's a male fantasy. Yeah, men have fantasies, of course. Women have fantasies too, and I look a little bit at the female literature. And Jordan Peterson has mentioned this, but got it completely wrong, saying that actually, the most popular literature is werewolves. It's actually not true, but it is true that it's a tiny percent. So you can kind of divide women's romantic literature into two. Mostly it's billionaires, doctors, lawyers, bodyguards, all the people who are kind of respectable in society and have power in society. That's what women fantasize about, apparently. But, there's a sort of smaller genre of romantic literature, which is werewolves, warlocks, vampires, of course, sort of these sort of nighttime creatures that are going to take you away from society. But yes, it's a complex question that you're asking, in that, men do have fantasies, and men like to project their sexual fantasies onto the occult if that's what they are into. And, not every dream is a revelation. Sometimes it's just a dream. Not every female figure that comes to your mind when you're meditating is an appearance of a deity. Maybe it's just your imagination. And I think that takes a long time to kind of get a grips with and to understand and see what emerges with each of these things, or doesn't emerge, or what repeats over many decades. But yeah, to be instantly dismissive, that's just a male fantasy, is actually quite a juvenile and actually very unintelligent way of thinking about things. We should be able to look at everything dispassionately and ask reasonable and rational questions, even though what we're doing might not be rational. And and I meet all these people who say that they're rational, and well, why do they put ingredients on the back of food instead of on the front if you're so rational? Why, aren't you interested in sex and movies and a flashy car and all this kind of none of this is rational. We almost never think rationally. Very rarely we really think rationally. But we should have the capacity to think rationally, so that we can evaluate things that are not necessarily rational. But yeah, so yeah, it in brief, yeah, it's a danger to dismiss something as just, that's a male fantasy. Just as it's a danger to think that, a woman appeared in my dream, that must be some kind of supernatural woman who's got a message for me, and I have to take it all terribly seriously. Things need to be evaluated on their own merits.
I believe in safe for myself. Be totally honest with you. There was experiences that I had that were pretty intense, and definitely changed my life. Rocked. I even had physical changes and everything. Pretty bizarre. And I tried talking to a few people that were in the lodge with me when I was in the OTO, And their answers were like kind of a major reason why I left, actually. Because I was like, you're no fucking help whatsoever at all.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, and this is the problem, and it must be like these orders. Like I've even tried to talk to Golden Dawn dudes about it, and it's like, I'm just at this point to where it's like, if you didn't have this experience, you just want to fucking blow it off, because it's like, oh fuck, they might be better than me, and I'm not even trying to say that.
Yeah, that is something.
Reason. It's like the person might, hurt their ego if they think some other person that's in the occult might have had an attainment or an experience they haven't had yet.
Yeah, that like definitely happens.
If I'm confused about it still, how much, there's like, what's really the difference? Because I don't fully understand it. So I don't have the knowledge and understanding still yet. You know what I'm getting at? It's like, what the?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I mean, yeah, we don't really have a system like tantric Buddhism that goes back thousands of years at all. And in some ways, we're kind of groping in the dark. I mean, I think the positive thing about that is that, that enables us to be maybe more creative and artistic, but there's a bigger risk to it as well. Well, and unless you get into the whole guru thing, which sometimes that's abused, but yeah, we're in a sense out on our own, psychonauts, exploring these worlds and trying to figure things out for ourselves to a very large degree. And I've been doing this for over 40 years at this point, 45 years. So I'm able to reflect to some degree on 40 years. So I've been able to reflect to some degree on things that have happened, but it's a long process, and it can't be rushed, probably.
Yeah, no, that's great. I was wondering, and it seems to me that when I first read the title of your new book, that this, supernatural woman, the first thing that comes to mind for myself is interesting how you said it's not really talked about that much for many reasons, but in Dante's, works, in his Divine Comedies, Beatrice being his supernatural woman, that idea of the beloved coming down and making sure Dante follows the correct path, so then Virgil can guide him through into the Inferno and the underworld. That also then reminds me of Plato in his Platonic works, talking about how, the beloved and the beloved in the Phaedrus that Socrates is talking about, and how he has gone up against the muses and he feels bad for what he said, so he has to rework the whole thing. Is that, how much does that have to do with, I think it has a lot to do with what you're talking about, correct?
Yeah, it definitely does, although I don't speak about Dante. But, just as an aside, since you mentioned Plato, and I forget which Platonic dialogue it's in, but in one of the Platonic dialogues, Socrates says, I'm speaking much more eloquently at the moment, and that's because you've exposed me to this nymph that lives in this area. And so the nymph is something that some men would marry, and they would pray to the nymph or be married to the nymph, or maybe pray to the goddesses and gods as well, but they maybe live out in the wilds and be in a relationship with this nymph. So it sounds to us just like it's a literary kind of affectation, but it was really believed at the time. But yeah, in regard to Dante and the supernatural woman coming down to help out the male, you definitely see that a lot. And in Norse mythology, for example, Sigurd, the dragon slayer, comes across this Valkyrie, the chooser of the slain, who's in a ring of fire on a mountaintop, and she teaches him the magic. And it seems to me, and I know I've mentioned Jordan Peterson already, kind of critically, and I don't want to be critical, but Peterson talks about how the woman, mythologically or psychologically, the woman represents chaos, and just to strongman his argument or steelman his argument slightly, I mean, I guess you could say that, well, the female is often, not always, but often associated with the earth, and the earth is kind of chaotic, it's nature and wild, and that is true. But I have to say, in my research over, everything from ancient Greek to Middle English. To me, what seems to be much more of a recurring theme is that the woman is actually the mind, or the kind of intellect and the guiding principle, and the male is this sort of a brute force, who's slaying the dragon and going out into nature, or in his ship going to steal the golden fleece, and it's just this brute force, almost a brute force of nature in a sense, just not really guided. And then the woman comes in to sort of refine him and put him in the right direction, and also protect him with magic. So the male is like this force, this energy, and the female is actually the mind. And when they work together, you get character.
Sorry, Judy. No, please go ahead.
No, I just wanted to ask, could it be that the woman is viewed as chaos only because in order to refine and redevelop, you're going to have to shake some of the unneeded aspects, and that brings on the chaos? Because it's usually something that the initiate or the person is attached to and they don't want to release. So it seems kind of chaotic.
I mean, I think you could say that. I think it would. I mean, I don't think Jordan Peterson has looked deeply at these same myths and isn't aware of them, or isn't aware of most of them. So, but I think, my honest appraisal would be, actually, she more likely represents order than anything. That she is the one who establishes the path. And there's a really great Middle English, Chaucer, Geoffrey Chaucer, the Middle English author who wrote Canterbury Tales, and in there there's a tale called The Wife of Bath, which is really awesome. And I won't go into the whole tale, but this degenerate knight is forced to marry this old hag, and she beats him down. He's very abusive to her and just an all-round bad guy. And then she beats him down psychologically or spiritually, and says, "Oh, you think you're an aristocrat because you were born into money, but a real aristocrat is the character, and you don't have one. You're just this monster. And what about Jesus? And you're nothing like that, and you're just terrible." And then she beats him down so much that he accepts her dominion over her, and at that point she transforms into this beautiful woman. And we should realize that she's actually a fairy, and she's sort of initiating him, in a sense, in our terminology. And rather like the Filgia, she or at least her appearance is tied to his character. She is the ugliest woman on earth, and he's a pretty ugly person inside. And then once his character is transformed by her, then she turns into this beautiful woman, which matches his inside now, which has changed. But in this sense, she's actually the initiator of order. She's the one who's making him not this sort of degenerate who should have had his head chopped off because he's just this sort of criminal lowlife, and has now made him conform to society. Society was obviously Christian at the time. So I think he's mostly wrong. Although you could say that, well, as a embodiment of Mother Earth or something, that would be chaos. But I think, no, in my experience, and as I write about, I think this figure is much more about order and about the mind than chaos, for sure. The man is actually the kind of chaotic being who's out of control.
So sorry, you kind of answered my question, Angel, or my sort of thesis point, but I mean, and Judith obviously addressed it with her question. But in Tantra, we do consider the female consort to be able to arise from chaos into space. So she can start there as a lower point of consciousness, this kind of like quote unquote Gaian. I'm not that comfortable using the Hellenic cosmology, but so I apologize, but we would call it like Mamos or Ekajati, or like the primordial queen of like the Pleiades or the pole star. Sometimes it depends on your text, obviously, but yeah, she would climb in consciousness to, if you want to call it, Keter. So in that action, she kind of reconciles and rectifies herself. So this is something that Brandon and I often disagree about, is that like the more Hermetic Kabbalah places, like the devouring mother, obviously Abina, But in Tantra, we would say that every female wisdom dakini is a wisdom dakini, so closer to Hokmah, because they're free in space. If they're enlightened, of course. There are obviously, they can take appearance existence, or she can take appearance existence in many forms. So I don't know if you had any thoughts on that. If you like that idea that she can be sort of free in space as wisdom rather than like the intellect. But I mean, if you want to comment on that, I would love to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Yeah. So, well, I think that what I'm dealing with in the book is a particular category of a being, which is one that is, associated with the man, but also with, the genius, poetry, literature, wisdom, and dreams and death as well. So, I don't see anything in the myths that I've studied about a woman kind of arising from a lower consciousness to higher. There might well be sort of lower consciousness females in the same culture, but it's not within these myths themselves or these stories themselves. Or at least it would, even if you could discern it, I think you would be largely projecting onto it.
Does anybody have anything?
Yeah, just one more thought was that in which I like, personally, I always like, as much as I like classical literature, I like to relate things to anime and manga. And so there's this author Kishimoto who wrote Naruto, but he did this like side thing where it's called Samurai 8. And he is talking about something fascinating where he puts a lot of Bushido code into his workings, and that the samurai sword is his soul. And in this story, what's beautiful about it is the kid who's trying to become the samurai, and he's trying to remember that he actually is and comes from this long line of samurai avatars. And so he himself lost his higher self that he's trying to find back. And he does that through the princess. And in this way, it's like an actual physical princess. But the idea is that she is the only one who has the key to unlock his samurai's sword, which can be seen in many different ways, right? The Freudian way to the Jungian way to the occulted esoteric way, where it's that holy grail, the merging type of sacred marriage. So I kind of find that fascinating with this beloved to the beloved, but you also see it in the Eastern styles with the Bushido stuff. So, I know with your warrior path work, you've talked to kind of about the mystic Bushido stuff too. So I was just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
That's interesting. I mean, I'm not familiar with that story. I mean, it's certainly very interesting, and it seems to align with what we're talking about. But since I don't know, I'm not going to comment on it. But I mean, this is obviously not related to the samurai, but sort of an interesting point that in England and maybe other parts of Northern Europe, there was a practice of where you would bend a sword and break it and throw it in the river when the owner died, as if to send it to the afterlife with the owner. So that's kind of interesting. So what I guess there's always a danger of comparing cultures or thinking that similarities mean it's the same thing, and it doesn't. But I guess it might suggest that there is this idea that the sword has a soul, or is part of the soul of the owner, which you could see why.
Yeah, definitely. And what's so cool about it is it does adhere to the idea that the masculine initiate, which is what the main character is a more chaotic minded individual who's trying to get his shit together. And until he finds his honor, which is the princess, until he has that thing to work towards, he can't get and structure his life accordingly, which then is the symbolic understanding of that sword being that of your critical thinking or reason, or, and these different things, let alone the intellect. And so it's almost like the feminine figure can ignite the masculine intellect to be the true protector of the kingdom, is kind of how I was reading that kind of situation, which kind of relates.
I wanted to ask, and this is kind of actually due to Jin a little bit, about something he said earlier that made me think about my own experience again, and kind of like the tree of life. If you were to kind of like, for me, if I'm asking maybe the supernatural woman, from my experience talking about the stuff I had before and how I looked at like this female divinity or something, I, for some reason, have always kind of looked at it for some reason as like the Empress Tarot card. And when Jin mentioned something about Chokma, the female thing, that made me think about, well, it is between Chokma and Binah. Would you say that maybe would be, if you had to pick a tarot card to maybe represent what you're getting at, would you say that might suffice? Might be good enough?
Yeah, I don't think it really aligns to the tarot.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of female cards, the High Priestess as well. But yeah, I'm not really sure which one I would pick, and I'm not sure that it would really align with it totally if it did, to be honest.
Okay. No, it was just something for me. That's how,
Yeah.
with the Empress card. All right. Yeah. Now the question I did have next, about the muse. You trace this figure through ancient Greek tradition. How does the muse differ from the modern idea of inspiration to you?
Yeah. Well, I think our modern idea of inspiration is, in a sense, it's personal. That is, as someone who writes and creates art as well, that inspiration is seen to be, to come from the genius, but the genius is just a result of the machinations of the brain ticking over, or whatever it might be. And I think the muse, or these figures that are associated with the genius in some way, they are external to the person. And even as I mentioned, Sigurd the Dragon Slayer, who meets this Valkyrie who teaches him magic, that it's something that comes from outside. And there's always good and bad points about anything. But I think, Jung and psychology has convinced us that it's all just in our own heads. And I think that's just a little bit dangerous, that some things actually might be outside of our heads. It may be in a supernatural sense, obviously in other ways as well. But, some things are unexplained, or seem to be. And I think we all sort of sense that when, we move through the world, and even if it's these sort of coincidences or synchronicities, as Jung would say, something seems to be going on outside of us. Some force seems to be working outside of us. But so I think, that's the big difference, that since psychology, we see everything as just a process of the brain. So that, even gods just represent some aspect of our psyche, or whatever it might be. And maybe there's a parallel in nature or something like that, but it's essentially internal. That, if you do a ritual to Mars, Mars isn't a real thing that's out there. Mars is, it's the feisty, martial aspect of our personality that might be underdeveloped or whatever. But, in antiquity, it wasn't, they didn't really think, let me pray to Mars because it's part of my personality. They thought, so that the god can come and help me win a battle, maybe I'll see him on the battlefield. It's this external thing. So I think that's the big difference.
Thank you. That was a great answer. Anybody have anything before I go forward? Nothing? What role does the supernatural woman play in Zoroastrian or Iranian tradition?
Yeah, that's not something I touch on as much, or go into as much, but it's intriguing. There's this female being called Dana, and she stands on this bridge between life and death, the bridge of Sinvat. And when the deceased person approaches, if she judges that they are of a poor character, she will, send them into hell. And if they are of a good character, then she will lead them across the bridge into the heavenly realm. So, it's, again, it's this female being who's in some way tied to the character of the individual.
That's interesting. There was the actual name. I forget. I can't remember. I should. I just was reading it and recording it yesterday. But there was like an actual male. I wanted to do a show on male moon gods because I think most people just always associate that with feminine.
That's right. Yeah.
And well, there are dudes associated with it, and there may be a reason for it,
Yeah.
So I did a show on that, and there was one that like one of the male moon gods kind of was like a dude that was like judging you in the sky. Like it was kind of the whole story was kind of being judged and like kind of tossed to the side, almost like just interesting what you just said right now. I was like, I was just reading about a male moon god that had that attribute, but yet you were giving it to a woman,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, on the note of male moon gods, I mean, this came up recently. I gave it a talk in a Masonic lodge, and somebody said to me, "Well, isn't the male and female implied in the sun and moon in the lodge?" And I said, "Well, I assume you think that the sun is male and the moon is female, because it doesn't say that they have a gender in Freemasonry." So, but he's read Jung, and he knows that that's the case always, except when it's not the case. And I mean, even Sunday and Monday come from old English words, and the Old English or the Anglo-Saxons had a moon god and a sun goddess, and you can see why if you read the Old English rune poem where it talks about day, meaning the sun is effectively, what is day or what is the sun? It's this nurturing thing that brings blessings to everyone. And you can see why, right? If you're in the desert and the sun is blazing down, destroying your crops, going to burn you to a crisp in 3 hours, then it's this raging war god with its spears of heat. But if you're in some freezing country in northern Europe where they have night for 12 hours, the sun is a goddess that's nurturing and brings life. It's the same thing, but it's a totally different experience of it.
Yeah, I even found it interesting how a lot of ways that it was tied to men was because of the hunting aspect. Because
right,
at night,
that's right. Yeah,
even with the moonlight, it's like enough to where you could still hide, but enough to see to go out and hunt. I was like,
that's right. Yeah, years ago, on that note, I went to a Masonic lodge, and it was in the middle of the countryside in America, and they said, "Oh, this is a moon lodge," and I'd never even heard of a moon lodge. And they said, well, they used to meet on the full moon because it was the only time you could have enough light to get to the lodge and back.
Yeah, it was used as a way to function at night. I found that so interesting.
Yeah, so you can see like 100, 200 years ago, that the full moon would have been a big thing, and it's going to determine whether you go out at night or not. Probably not most of the time, So you're meeting once a month because of the full moon. Yeah.
Yeah. I even put in there. It's like, how would we even think of that now with all the external lights? But with all that gone, think about how dark it will be outside.
Yeah.
That full moon, it's like, party time. Let's have a read.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice.
That's right.
Does anybody have anything before I keep going? Oh, okay. All right. Why do you think erotic or romantic dream encounters are so common in spiritual and magical traditions?
Well, it may be partly authentic, and it might be partly male fantasies, right? So it can be a bit of both. So that's probably why. But I mean, I'll talk about my own experience. I've mentioned this before, but I had a very interesting experience that I really did think and do think was something really significant, and that is, I used to have these nightmares, these recurring nightmares, and one night or one morning, I could sense I was asleep, and I could sense that I was going into this nightmare, and I feel the dread, as I was getting sucked into it, and then all of a sudden, this beautiful naked woman wrapped herself around me, and the natural instinct, as Loon was saying, with our culture would be to interpret that as, oh, that's a male fantasy and boo and sexism, but this being sort of wrapped herself around me, and the nightmare sort of dissipated. It didn't happen, and I've never had that nightmare since. And in a world of psychology, I think the instinct, if not to just say it's a male fantasy, but if we were going to go a bit deeper in our culture, we would say that, well, this is some part of the unconscious, and this is just part of the psyche, and well, it's just part of you. But I would say, well, how is it possible that when I was in a state of dread going into this nightmare, that there's some independent part of my psyche that can swoop in and save me from it, and then it never happens again. And maybe maybe they're right, but I don't know that they are or they're not. But it didn't feel like that at all. It felt like something completely external. And I was saying earlier that our conception of these things, as opposed to the ancients or the people before the modern world, is that we think of it as all in our brain, and they thought of it as all external. And regardless of who's right, I think at the end of the day, it might be better to think that it's external, even if it's not, because that gives it a sort of power that it wouldn't otherwise have. But I personally do think it's at least partly external. But certainly this figure, did not feel like at all like it was part of my my psyche. It seemed to be completely independent to it. And the fact that I've never had this nightmare again, when I had it pretty frequently, says something to me that is beyond what I think psychology can explain, or at least can explain well. So.
Yeah, no, I love that, because it's going on something that I think is really important that happens in our history of language, is that we start to understand that due to our language, we separate things into subjective and objective consciousness. And it's actually so much like more merged into that kind of thing. And so it's like troublesome that we keep wanting to make things all mind or all matter, when actually that's not right. How we experience reality. We experience it phenomenologically, which means that we're intending towards something at all times. And so it's like, how do we then get to the place where we can speak and write and actually explain our reality in a way that merges these two things? We almost have to come up with a brand new language to do so. And I think it would be a lot healthier, because then we won't psychologize things and we won't like objectify things so much.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I do have a question, because we're talking about how the supernatural woman actually helps elevate and mold the male initiate. But do you find that sometimes, instead of being elevated, sometimes the male initiate gets trapped within the ideology or, I hate to say fantasy, but fantasy of her?
Well, I think that this supernatural woman figure is largely unknown in our time, but if a male is devoting himself, let's say, to a female goddess, it might well be, obviously there's a danger of it sort of becoming this sort of sexual obsession or something like that. But I think, personally, I see most people in the esoteric are in some way trapped, and that's definitely my experience of being around them or being involved in their groups or whatever. I would honestly say that most people involved in the esoteric are actually not esoteric at all. They're actually fundamentalists, and we foolishly get tricked into believing they're esoteric because they like alchemy or something like that. It's like, I was with members of Tahuti Lodge about 25 years ago, a couple of birthday celebrations in a restaurant, and not to pick on them, but I remember distinctly, they were all through the night, they were quoting the Book of the Law, the system and system, and I was like, good God, if this was Christians, I mean, at least their book is huge in comparison, but if this was Christians, I would think these people are utter lunatics, but they're all
they would have been talking shit if they heard another religion doing that.
Sorry, I missed that.
It said they totally would have had something to say if they overheard another religion doing that.
Absolutely, they would, and if it was Christians, they would laugh their head off. I'm like, why? Your book, your holy book, is about 5 pages long, but yet you quote it all night long at everything.
Well, that's why they find it so short.
For sure, but it's a fundamentalist mindset. But
it is.
We think, oh, they're esoteric because they like Crowley, but actually it's fundamentalism, and I see it everywhere, more and more. It's, I gave a talk at a lodge a little while ago on the supernatural woman, and this person asked about the sun and moon being male and female, and And I said, well, where are you getting that? It doesn't say that they're male or female in the Masonic Lodge. You're projecting your, this Jungianism that you think is real and everywhere onto the Masonic ritual and symbolism, whereas you should actually just begin with what it says and figure out what it actually means in itself. But when as soon as I said that, someone else, put up their hand and said, well, but there are but couldn't you say all, there's male and female all through it? And I said, well, you could say that, right? You could say a sword is male and the column of beauty is female. Of course you could say that. I mean, obviously, but it's like he couldn't process the idea that it might not be this sort of Jungian male and female thing, and that we should just begin with what it says rather than what we can impose on it. It's like, yeah, obviously a sword could be masculine, but if that's not what it's saying, why not begin with what it says? What does it say about the sword, or what does it say about the column of beauty? Why wouldn't you begin there? Why would you go to something and impose your views on it because you think that they're universal? Why wouldn't you actually try to just learn what it says and then see if you agree with it or not? It's like that Zen saying, or that Zen anecdote, which I'm sure we all know of, the I forget who it is, but this Zen disciple goes to a Zen monk and is talking away, and the Zen monk is pouring tea into a cup and he allows it to all flow over, and the disciple says, what are you doing? It's all flowing over. And he says, like your mind, nothing else can go in. And that's a state of so many people in this world, that they have a theory and then they join some initiatic tradition, and they impose that on the tradition. They see it there, but they don't actually learn anything about the tradition that they just join. They just try and impose something on it. So I think that there's this fundamentalism is not something that's inherent to Christianity or Buddhism or Judaism, and just as esotericism is not fundamental to the world of the esoteric. And most people in esotericism are, have fundamentalist traits. Whereas, I've met a monk, I used to stay in a monastery for a few days a year, and you could say that they were extremely chill in comparison. If you didn't believe it, they didn't care. I went there reading the Bhagavad Gita the first time, and there's a monk who'd converted, who was Indian. He just was just sort of interested why I was reading the Bhagavad Gita. No one said to me I shouldn't do it. So it's the mindset is different, but there is this fundamentalism in the occult world and in the esoteric world.
Okay. I've noticed, for just some reason, I don't know, I've just noticed it seems to go with orders more, and I wonder if that almost starts to make it seem like a religion or a church for them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, I've definitely known people who have, said, well, they will go through all of the Masonic degrees, and there are many of them. I mean, there's 3, Entered Apprentice, Fellowcraft, and Master Mason, when you've essentially completed Freemasonry. But then all of these others were created in France and Germany, as you got all of these competing Masonic rites during the 18th century. And then some of these degrees remain, but there's 33 in the Scottish Rite. I think there's 10 or 13, depending how you count it, in the York Rite. And then there are all these other degrees on the side. And, I've met people who've gone through them all, and then they join invitational Masonic bodies, and they join the Martinists and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And they really feel that, they've got the secret now, because in the Rose Croix degree, the rose and cross means this, and then they joined the Societas Rosicruciana, and it meant something a little bit different, and then they joined the Golden Dawn, and it was like a little bit different, and now they've got the secret. It's like all of these things were just made up historically. There's nothing wrong with them. They're systems, but the point isn't to keep going through collecting little tidbits of information or getting another symbol. It's to have a revelation and be connected to something real. I said this rather controversially at the lodge I spoke to. I said, people go through these degrees. That's not the point of an initiation. The point of an initiation isn't to go through another 30 degrees, or then you join, some irregular Masonic, Memphis and Mizraim rite of 93 degrees or 95 degrees. And you get those, and then it's endless. The point is to be connected to something real, something outside of yourself that reveals the mystery of existence, that reveals life to be a kind of poem in a sense.
I remember when I guess it's all right with you, Judith. When me and you and Jordan happened to take a degree together at the lodge. I remember afterwards, Jordan had made like a comment like, "Oh, so I really," because like they would have specific times you had to wait between initiations, and he was like, "Oh, do we really got to wait?" And I think it might have been the lodge master actually at the time who said like, kind of helps to even understand the experience you just had from the initiation before you move on to another one.
Yeah.
Of course.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's supposed to be an experience.
Yeah.
Well, it's almost even like the people who take massive dosages of mushrooms or psychedelics, and then all of a sudden they do it again the next day or
Yeah.
a week later. It's like, how can you can't possibly fathom to integrate the experience and then just continue putting your nervous system in a vulnerable state. You'll that's how we lose boundaries. And I think that's one of the massive problems with the psychedelic entheogenic usages is that we don't know how to create boundaries,
Yeah.
which are really important.
For sure.
Also, to add on that, I think it's people tend not to process the experience. They don't try to learn from it. And I think that's also a big problem.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. And that's, as I say, that's something that takes years, especially for, people in the West where we don't have a kind of canon that we're drawing on necessarily, it takes as you were saying, then you get people in orders who try and dismiss what you've experienced, or they try and tell you what it is and it's actually not that, because they want to fit it into their mold, but actually it might be something else for you. And to explore that deeply takes a long time. It takes years, because you're going to get little things that are going to happen along the way that kind of make sense of it. So
there's times now when I will like things that I went through with initiation will pop into my head and I'll be like, holy fuck, what the fuck did that mean?
Yeah.
Like I'm still like, yeah.
And it's not the initiation you just went through. It's probably the initiation you took a couple of years back.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's like shit from like years ago. I'm like, fuck that small little thing. Like, is there a reason for that?
Yeah.
And I'll mind fuck the shit out of it, and who knows? But yeah, like there's still things that still I'm like, I don't even understand what that was there for, why, So it's something I think you need to figure out, or I think it helps.
Yeah, and I think I even myself am still putting together and learning from and reworking my early years of psychedelic experiences. I'm almost 40. In my younger 20s is when I broke free from the matrix, or whatever the fuck that means. But it's when I had my own apocalyptic vision, and everything is, I'm now talking to you guys. You know what I mean? My whole life changed in those moments, but I find like it took me 20 years, and my own externalized supernatural woman, my lovely Kaiva Rose, she I've gone through, not gone through, but like I've had relationships where just me projecting my anima externally. And it has been kind of like what they say, I think in Crowley's book 4, he talks about through the initiations that you can actually have a feminine figure, or for the females, the masculine figure that leads you away from your path as you're going up the initiatory grades, right? And instead I'm finally figuring not figured it out, but I've worked my way through a bunch of stuff, and then all of a sudden my beautiful Rose has now helped lead me into my true pathway, because she knows how to bring the fire and at the same time hold the crucible that allows my own organizational intellect. And it's led me to the stream with you 3. So
nice.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
That was good. Thank you. One other thing I did want to get into, and it's kind of getting there, I'll cut it off soon. The book brings in Jung's anima and animus. Where does Jung help us understand this phenomenon, and where do you think he falls short?
Yeah. Well, I think he mostly falls short, to be honest with you. You probably expected I was going to say that, right? But yeah, I mean, I suppose you could say that, well, he kind of unveiled to our society that was quite rigid at one point, that there was this feminine side, and that men could have a feminine side, and this kind of thing. I mean, I read his wife's writings on the anima and animus. I thought that she would be the best person to read, and Emma Jung. And I have to say, it's more occult than almost any occult book you could read, but it also, to me, it also didn't make a lot of sense, and that's one thing that actually kind of made it very occult sounding. But she references Odin and runes and Valkyries and stuff like that. It's all very cool, but at the same time, I was less convinced by the theory after I'd read it than I was before, and I felt that the popular notion of the anima, where the woman you fall in love with is a reflection of your anima, it was actually much more sophisticated than the real sort of Jungian theory, which I found bizarre. But I hope I'm not doing it an injustice. But basically, it's the idea that, well, so almost anything you're attracted to is, let's say, as men, is the anima, and and the anima can appear in could appear in a fairy tale or on some TV drama, in life, of course. And then behind it, there's this sort of great mother anima that's molding all of these to her shape, she says. And I already found that kind of confusing enough, not least of all because I would be constantly assaulted by the anima, and I think we all would, but which would make us living in a matriarchy, I guess. But then at one point she says, oh, and the anima leads us to more and more consciousness, which seems to be more like more and more fitting into society. But then she says, but there's this other type of anima, and she says she can't explain why, but that leads the man away from consciousness, or might say leads him away from fitting into society, I think. And although she says she can't understand why, which is maybe not a good thing to say in a book, but I did feel if she had explored that, they would have got somewhere really interesting, because rather like the female romantic literature of billionaires and doctors on one side and werewolves and vampires on the other, maybe this other anima that's leading men away from consciousness is actually leading them to the genius. And maybe the anima, and this was my reading, the anima of of Jungianism is actually this thing that's kind of trying to plug men into society. And and so it's almost like it's a sort of anti-genius when you really take a look at at least what Emma Jung was saying. That's my reading on it. But my objection to it is ultimately that it's less interesting than what you find in antiquity with the Philgia or the nymph, where it's this real being that transforms you and is associated with the genius, not with plugging you into society, but with the genius and with literature and poetry and dreams and death. And I find that much more exciting, and it's considered to be a real thing that can show up and kind of well, maybe reveal itself to you when it wants to. So on the one hand, it's good because unveils, okay, men have a feminine side or whatever, or that there's some kind of projection of the character into a kind of feminine appearance. But I don't think, for me, that doesn't really get me anywhere. But yeah, so it's good in that sense, maybe, but I think it's kind of inferior to what we see in ancient mythology, which is a lot more interesting.
Yeah, that's great. I do completely agree with that, because the enema, psychological, like Jungian enema thing, is it helpful when we're trying to understand, but not helpful when we're trying to implement an actual magical worldview of a completely synthesized world of mind magic.
Yeah, and I don't think it was her, but I saw another early Jungian, actually, there's a recording of her speaking, and she says, oh, she had a dream about this little boy, and she realized that this was the animus. And I thought, good grief, it's everywhere. It's your lover, it's this attractive man or woman, it's a woman or a man in a fairy tale, it's the mother goddess behind it all, it's a child. It's like, is there anything that isn't the anima? And I found that confusing.
Yeah, because because why can't it actually be its own autonomous entity that enters into the dream world to help bring you into? I agree with that.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Because I mean, let's just convert it not being a little boy, the animus, but let's say it's a little girl, the anima. But it's like what's everything? It's the attractive woman. It's it's your girlfriend. it's your this woman you read about in a book. It's this child. It's like, what's going on? It's just too much. It's like this constant anima assault. It's like, it can't be if it's a real thing. And I think that's the thing. It starts to reveal itself as more of it's like a theory that you can you can mold, or that can mold you, but it's not itself. It's not. I would expect the anima to be one thing that would be recognizable, even if it's projected onto your girlfriend or whatever. But it's a definite thing, and that's it. The theory is it's just too amorphous, and it can be anything, and that I think allows it to be open to abuse. So
yeah, no, it almost seems a little solipsistic in its own
very
right?
much so, yeah, which I think psychology, there is a danger with that anyway. But yeah, I mean, I think and then, but of course then it can also be, well, that attractive woman is my anima, so of course I should
then that's like Scarlet Woman shit. All of a sudden we're like projecting the Scarlet Woman onto every woman we want to bang or some shit like that.
So delicately put. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's that redneck farm kid in me that comes out.
That's good. I was like, yo, how does he know that? That's fucking funny you just said that, Brandon. Wow. It's real
out
talk.
of the mouth of rednecks, obviously.
Can't help it. Help it. Born and raised, I may have transcended that, but it's forever there.
No, I get it. Thank you so much for coming on, man. This is really a great talk. I'd really love to have you back on in the future too. I mean, there's so much
of course, absolutely. Yeah,
have a conversation with. Again, it was truly a pleasure. Great answers and really in-depth stuff, man. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. Likewise.
It's exactly what I try to get. The kind of guests I try to get on. Before we wrap it up, Judith, would you like to say anything and let everybody know?
First, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to see Brandon and Jen. I love seeing you guys. Angel, I actually have to say a special thank you for you addressing this subject matter. As someone who's been dealing within the occult world for decades now, the male experience has not been represented enough, I feel, or understood enough. And I actually, you've brought a little bit more of an understanding into my view. And I hope throughout the community, more people will understand this angle of the process.
Yeah.
And everybody else, you could find me on X, Spreaker, and YouTube as the Loon. Actually, I have the weekly brunch coming up later on today.
Awesome. Thank you very much for joining us, Judith. I appreciate it. I know you are busy on Sundays. And my man Brandon, what is going on, sir? Please let everybody know what's up with the Maggots.
Yeah. Lots of stuff going on. Yeah, Nick, as always, love being a fellow reject, trying to reorganize the Western esoteric occult community of all its nonsense, bringing that fire on a daily basis. Judith, I love being on stream with you. You are such a doll, and I'm so lucky every time our stars align to be here together. Angel, I'm so looking forward to chatting with you on my own area as well. Your books have been a helping guide of also masculine male myself trying to find his way in this strange ocean of a world. And so I'm very grateful that we were able to meet. So this has actually been something I've wanted to do for a long time, is meet you and have this conversation. Besides that, people just head over to Magus in the Media. We're breaking things down on a daily basis, and that's all. Just subscribe, like, and share. I got merch, we got videos, we got all that stuff. Everyone on this panel and every reject there, everyone out there listening, just subscribe to all of us, because there's lots of nonsense out there, and we're trying to take the sword of reason to it as fast as possible. So thank you, Nick. Thank you, Angel. Thank you, Judith.
Thank you, Magus. Always appreciate it when you're here, my man. And shout out to Jen. Thank you very much for making it on here. Go check out his Threshold Saints and that Friday night Gnostic Mass stuff he does. Go check that out. And Angel, please let everybody know, anything you want to promote. Remind them about the book. If you got anything you want people to check out, please let them know.
Well, I would love people to check out the book, Supernatural Woman and the Male Initiate, Bonded Through Dreams. which you can get it on pre-order from Amazon, and it'll be on Barnes & Noble and all of those other places pretty soon. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you very much, and hopefully we'll have you back as a returning guest some point in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Right.
It's been good
Awesome.
chatting with you all. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. And everybody in the chat, I really appreciate it. There was a lot of great stuff in there, and that's why I go live. I love seeing you guys. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.